Welcome back.
Welcome back.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for tuning in.
Yeah, I'm Megan.
Oh, yeah, we didn't do that.
We haven't done
I'm
that.
Hanna. Hi. I just yelled that, I think. Sorry.
All good. Hi.
Hi.
Welcome to Hey Mom, I have questions.
Oh, wow. You're being so professional. Okay, keep going.
What are we talking about this week, Hanna? Too far. Dial it back.
I wanted to talk about something that I read recently that I found really interesting.
Oh, tell me.
I'm currently reading the book by Oprah and Dr. Perry, and I think he has more credentials, and I forgot. I'm sorry. He's not going to listen to this, so it's fine.
No.
What Happened to You?
Yeah.
Is the title of the book. And I'm 4 chapters in, so give me grace if I get anything wrong. But
Yeah.
I want to say that the message and the motivation of the book is to change the question, what's wrong with you, to what happened to you.
Mm-hmm.
So they talk about trauma. Everybody knows that Oprah had a very traumatic childhood. And this doctor, like that's his, what he studies. That has been his focus for, I don't know how many years. They've been talking about trauma for 30 years. So I don't know how long he has studied it. So yeah.
Sure.
Time. So they decided to write this book together, and I'm really enjoying it. It's really interesting.
Yeah.
And the other day I came across something that really blew my mind, and I thought it might be interesting to talk about it on the podcast. So I want to read that part. So it talks about, I'm going to make this big on my screen, so I'm not going to see you for a little bit.
Okay.
But I'll be back.
I'll miss you.
So, hold on. Let me actually see what the chapter is called. The chapter is called The Spectrum of Trauma.
Okay.
And they talk about so there's a scale, a test, a study that was done that I also found very interesting, and now want to give to everyone to find out what everyone's score is. The Adverse Childhood Experience Survey, and it has a survey. Have you heard about that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is everywhere in trauma and addiction, and they're huge in the world of psychoanalyzing and adult manifestations of adverse child experiences.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I had never heard of this. I found it really cool because, again, it focuses on what happened to you, and then from there going, okay, so that explains why you have these habits, tendencies, fears, whatever. So whatever we manifest because of that. Okay, so, and then they talk about how that is those study also has limits, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then there was this very interesting part that I wanted to read out. Let me find it again. Okay, so, quote, "Our second major finding is that the timing of adversity makes a huge difference in determining overall risk. Put simply, if you experience trauma at age 2, it will have more impact on your health than the same trauma taking place at age 17. Unfortunately, the ACE survey, the one we just talked about, does not help you make that distinction. It asks only whether any of these 10 adversities were present during the first 18 years of your life. When we look a little deeper into the timing of developmental risk, a powerful observation emerges. The basic finding is that the experiences of the first 2 months of life have a disproportionately important impact on your long-term health and development. This has to do with the remarkably rapid growth of the brain early in life and the organization of those all-important core regulatory networks. And they talked about that before in the book. They referenced that a lot. If, in the first 2 months of life, a child experienced high adversity with minimal relational buffering, but was then put into a healthier environment for the next 12 years, their outcomes were worse than the outcomes of children who had low adversity and healthy relational connections in the first 2 months, but then spent the next 12 years with high adversity. Think of that. The child who has only 2 months of really bad experiences does worse than the child with almost 12 years of bad experiences, all because of the timing of the experiences.
Yeah, that's absolutely mind-blowing.
That absolutely blew my mind.
Yeah.
Do you think it would be too long if I read a little bit more?
No, please, go for it.
Okay. This sounds discouraging, but we believe that poor outcomes are not inevitable. In fact, we believe that this is a perfect example of why we need developmentally informed trauma-aware systems. Think back to our earlier conversations about how important attentive, responsive caregiving is in providing the organizing experiences for the infant's stress response systems. Remember that if the life experiences of the first 2 months include inconsistent or unpredictable stress, this pattern of activation creates a sensitized stress response. That leads to a cascade of problems, trauma-related problems. And even when these children are no longer in high-risk settings, their problems have to be addressed by caregivers, pediatricians, mental health providers, and educators. But if these people misunderstand what's going on, if these systems focus on what is wrong with you, as unfortunately they typically do, the children won't get better. They will continue to struggle. Their emotional reactivity and behavior problems will be viewed without a developmentally or a trauma lens, which could lead to ineffective interventions. We believe these children could live happier, healthier lives if the homes, schools, healthcare, and mental health systems they grew up in replaced what's wrong with you with what happened to you. And we recognize the power and potential of very early childhood. Think of the impact just a few months of consistent, predictable support for a young parent could make. For the child, it could create a positive jumpstart in life that would lead to the development of more resilient stress response systems. And in turn, these regulated stress response systems would help ensure healthy development in higher parts of the brain.
Ooh, I'm really glad you read that second part.
Right?
Yeah.
A little bit later, they talk about, which I also found very interesting and very important for me, to learn that when you work on, so their example was a very young child saw people storming into the house and killing his mother in front of him.
Ooh.
And then there's a situation that they talk about that the father talked about. They were in the grocery store and his son said to the cashier, my mom's dead, she was killed. And then the cashier was like, oh, I'm sorry. And then it was over. And the father was like, oh, okay, he is we're addressing the trauma. He's trying to,
processing.
Yeah. So then when they were in the car, he tried to talk to him. I was like, do you miss mom? I miss her too. It's okay to talk about it. And he tried to, and the child, oh, actually, they weren't in the car yet. They were on their way out to the car. This is actually important. And the child started to like cover his ears and tried to started to move, which this is something else they talk about in the book. Rhythm regulates stress. Which is why running, meditating, breath work, rocking your baby, singing to your baby, music, sport, anything that's rhythm is soothing to us, which is why like rocking yourself, which you see a lot in children. Now that when I read that part, I was like, oh yeah, I got a vivid picture of children doing that. I was like, oh, that's so interesting. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So his son started doing that, and he didn't know what that meant. And I think he tried to talk to him more because he interpreted it differently. And then the son crawled out of the grocery cart that he was in and ran away because he like wanted to get away from this situation because it was too much. Yeah. So, anyways, Dr. Perry then explains that when we start to process and work on and heal trauma, we need to do it in like little increments. And we'll be able to tell when the limit is reached. Yeah. And specifically with children, it starts with a few seconds and then that's it. Yeah, and that was also very interesting and eye-opening to me that you really need to take it slow and
really, really
day by day and let the person with the trauma lead it and follow their cues of like, now I want to talk about it and now I don't anymore. So like when someone comes up to, let's say someone miscarried and they come up to you and want to talk to you about it, and then you talk about it for 5 minutes, and then she changes the subject and tells you a funny story of something that happened in the grocery store or whatever. Yeah. And like, I can imagine like I would maybe get confused and like, okay, wait, are we done? So like, to have that, I find it so helpful to have that in the back of my mind to realize, oh, okay, this was the portion and now we're done. And when she wants to talk more, she's going to let me know.
That, you just changed my life.
Right?
Yes.
Same. which is why I was like, I think we need to talk about this. This was huge for me.
Definitely. And it's that, wow.
We can take a minute.
No, it's good. I think a lot of times in those situations, when that rapid subject change happens, it's been both ways, right? Like I want to follow the person's lead, but then I also want them to know that it's okay to talk about the thing. Like, because sometimes you're like, oh, well, maybe they're just embarrassed or they feel like, like I should make it okay for them to talk about this more.
Yeah, same.
Yeah, so that's a really interesting flip. Yeah, and I've also been in the position where I'm like, what you're saying is really interesting, and I'm going to talk about it and expound about it a bunch because now my brain is going down all the avenues of all the things that I think are happening here and all the ways that this has influenced you and blah, 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 blah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But then obviously that person isn't there with me. They're not leading that conversation. I'm thinking cognitively about something that's happened to their insides, and talking about something traumatic from the outside is, yeah, that's incredible. Wow.
Yep. Yeah, this book is really good. 10 out of 10 recommend.
I heard the press on it when it was coming out. I heard, an interview with Oprah at some point about it, and it sounded really amazing.
Yeah.
So I'm very excited you're reading about it and can tell me about it.
They lead into every chapter starts with a story. So either Oprah tells a story from her life, which she has a lot of trauma
stories,
related stories. Yeah. Or even it's not even always from her life, but also from, like, she's interviewed so many people. She will pull from those examples too. Or it's the introduction would be a story from the practice of Dr. Perry. And then they use that example to explain something, and then they go back and forth. And yeah, it's really good. I love the combination of them. Like, Oprah, the person that had so much, like, all the boxes you could check. Yeah. Like, I don't know, she probably has a 10
all
score
the aces
on the and has interviewed like 150,000 people in her lifetime, and then this doctor, this scientist that has studied this like his whole life. That, like, what a combination. Of course you should write a book about it. Give me all the things.
Yeah. Maybe I can get the audiobook and listen to it. So if we bring it back to the infant.
Yeah. The 2 months.
Yeah, my favorite part of that. Yeah, first of all. Holy shit. Way to pile on pressure to people who already feel like they don't know what they're doing. But
I know.
I know.
I like how he said, if we could support parents in
that's what I was about to say. Like, my favorite part of that was, imagine what we could do for the children, read for the eventual adults in our society, if we supported parents during those first 8 weeks. Yeah.
So yes, people, we are back to preaching about postpartum care. Here we are.
No, not preaching, just like...
No.
Very enthusiastic about how important it is to have that time.
Yeah.
And I think about the hundreds of thousands of people in the U.S. that don't get 8 weeks off of work when they have a baby.
Yeah, that is mind-blowing to me.
And that doesn't mean that you can't, that baby can't build secure connection during that time if they're not with their parent the whole time. But, like, wow. Mm-hmm. We need to change some laws. We need to change some laws around here.
Yeah.
That's so interesting about the ages too of the ACEs. Obviously that's the starkest one, right? But the difference between something happening when you're 2 versus something happening when you're 17. Mm-hmm. It makes sense when you think about it for a second too, because you have more context, you have a higher, a wider history of safety and security and resources and cognitive functioning to understand abstract things and contact, all of the things. It makes sense. But yeah.
The 2 months versus 12 years was really what blew me away.
Yeah.
Like, how it's not about quantity but timing. I mean, all of it obviously sucks, and all of it is going to do its part. But, like, how much gravity the timing has. Mm-hmm. that, yeah, I would have never expected that.
No. Me either.
Because we also think they're so small. They don't notice anything. They don't know what's going on.
Yeah, it's so hard to imagine them as a person at that point. Right?
Yeah.
Which is such a huge part of like the respectful parenting, rye parenting,
right?
All of that stuff, right? Is that they are a full human from day one.
Yeah.
And we interact with them and treat them as a full human from day one. And the reason that's so like silly sounding to people, it seems silly to ask a 2-day-old infant if you can pick them up, right? It feels very silly.
Ask for permission to cut the umbilical cord.
Right. And like it feels very extra. Like
yeah.
And the idea behind that approach, I think, is related to this, right? It's thinking of them as a person whose experiences matter to them. Like that you're not going to remember it in the same way that we think of memory. You're not going to you can't talk, you can't communicate in ways that we're going to understand as a tiny infant. And yet, you are this full human whose experiences, very clearly based on this data, have an enormous impact on the rest of their life.
Yeah.
Like, freaking mind-blowing.
Yep.
But it's definitely affirming for that kind of conception of infants.
Yeah.
Which is cool. Because it seems right just from like a how to approach this situation standpoint. Like, to me anyway, it just kind of felt right.
Yeah, same.
But to hear that this is probably part of why, like,
yeah,
bonkers.
I don't know where to go from here. I think this episode is a lot of just us staring at each other in amazement and like processing.
Yeah. I think that's fine. I mean, I want to know more. I want to read this book now. And
I think you would enjoy it.
I think I would. It sounds like I would. And let's take care of people that just had babies so that they can take care of their baby.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And ask what happened to you. And not like, I want to even change it in my head, like not even think what's wrong with them, but
yeah, because you don't often ask like what's wrong with you to
no,
another
but
person.
You think
it's a little rude. But you think it, yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I love that message. I love that is the core that they revolve around.
Definitely. And you hear a lot from like, even from therapists and people like that don't want to talk about stuff that happened in the past. And I think there's certainly a place for that, for like figuring out how to move forward here and now.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also really important to have that context of what happened to you and how does it influence where you are now.
Yeah.
And how has it shaped your experience up to this point?
Yeah.
To give you the perspective you have now.
There's an example in the book, I think it's even the first one, the first chapter, the story that they lead in with. It was a patient from Dr. Perry very early in his practice. He was a veteran, and he just had finally found someone. He was dating someone new, and there was a situation that, I don't know, they were coming out of the cinema or something, and all of a sudden he was just on the ground covering his head, maybe even screaming, I don't know. And she went to him, like, what's wrong? How can I help you? And he attacked her. So they came into the practice desperately. Like, he'd called Dr. Perry and was like, we really need to talk. And so they came in together, and the patient asked Dr. Perry, tell her what's wrong with me. Which, like, isn't that heartbreaking?
Yeah.
And then they started to dissect that situation, and he, like, drew a graphic of how the brain works and how, like, how first you have, like, the emotional response, and, like, whatever's happening, it needs to travel all the way up there until your thinking sets in. Your thinking's not there when you go into a trauma response. When you're triggered by something, you're in that situation, and you can't, in that moment, not at first, make yourself mentally, rationally, make yourself understand that you're not in that situation. So what had happened in that moment is that a motorcycle backfired. Is that what that is? Which sounds like gunshots.
Right.
Which made him be back in, I forgot which word, but it made him be back there. So his reaction was to protect himself. Right. Which was why he attacked her, because in that situation, and it was so healing for him to understand what was happening. Yeah. To understand what had happened to him, that nothing is wrong with him, but understand what had happened to him and how that has an impact on his life now. Yeah. And how he can move forward with that. Right. Yeah. So I think there's a huge power in understanding ourselves and why we think, feel, act certain ways, what, like, the cascade is. Yeah. And with that, it always starts with yourself, right? Like, the better I know myself, the more capability I have of understanding someone else and their cascade and their why. And emphasize. Yeah. So I love this kind of stuff, obviously.
Yeah. Amen. Same. Well, I'm really glad you found that and you brought it to us. This is awesome.
I'm glad you were equally intrigued as I was.
Oh my gosh, yeah. I mean, that's a headline right there. Yeah. It's a huge deal. Well, cool. I'm overwhelmed. I hope you all found that interesting. Yeah. Mostly us just being astounded. Yep. Take care of yourselves and the little babies that live inside you. Yeah.
And everyone else around you, because everyone has had someone happen to them.
Yeah. Yep.
We all do.
We all do.
It doesn't need to be war.
No. It doesn't need to define your life either. The more you know about it and care for it, the easier it is to move around it, I think. Yeah. Or with it or through it, or however you want to, whatever preposition you want to use there. Alrighty.
Okay. Thanks everyone for listening.
Thanks for listening.
Feel free to leave us your thoughts. I would be very interested.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And we'll be back with probably a little bit of a lighter subject next week.
Probably. All right, we'll talk to you next week.
Bye.